Joining us now to talk politics is Wall Street Journal columnist and CBS News contributor Peggy Noonan, Slate's chief political correspondent and CBS News political analyst Jamelle Bouie. Molly Ball covers politics for The Atlantic, and Jeffrey Goldberg is national correspondent for The Atlantic. Peggy Noonan, where is the Republican race? Is it over? Donald Trump got it?
I think the wind is obviously at his back when you win the 5 primaries so decisively in the past week in the Northeast corridor primary. New York, big win before that. As somebody noted earlier in the program, my goodness, demographically, Trump did fine. He carried Greenwich, Connecticut. Holy mackerel, something big is happening in the party. I do think undergirding, the race is so big in many ways, but an essential thing is that Donald Trump, the rising Republican, in my view, likely nominee, is someone who stands for things so at odds with the longtime policies now of the past 15, 20 years of the Republican power people in Washington, the establishment, et cetera, on key issues like entitlement cutting, immigration, trade policies, his vague sense. I think everybody's vague sense that somehow these 10,000-page bills, which nobody reads, aren't necessarily working in Americans' favor. Also key, his non-assertive, perhaps, stance with the world. All of this is at odds with the standing of those who've been running the Republican Party for a long time. It's going to be very hard for them to mesh. I don't know how that works.
Although we saw, Jamelle, this week some acceptance. I mean, you saw Senator John Cornyn, Senator Bob Corker. The Republicans did seem to be falling in line. Even what Peggy said is true.
That's right. It honestly seems that many Washington Republicans dislike Ted Cruz so much
they do.
That they're willing to say, we'll go with Trump. We'd rather have Trump than Cruz. I think there might be some strategic thinking behind that as well. Ted Cruz, in a lot of ways, represents an entirely separate kind of Republican establishment coming from a very, very conservative world rooted in the West, not so much in the Northeast. And if he were the nominee and if he were the president, he wouldn't just be someone from the Republican Party proper. He would essentially be purging people from outside of his corner of the Republican Party from sort of like key places in Washington. And so you lose with Trump, you still can maintain your sphere of influence and just kind of try to rebuild. You have Cruz, or you lose with Cruz, and Cruz really does represent an entirely new kind of power center that jeopardizes you.
Molly, what do you make of where Trump is right now?
I think it's funny that you say that, because I've heard some Republicans make the opposite argument, right? That they feel that if they do lose either way, but if Cruz is the nominee, maybe it will sort of break the fever of the conservative grassroots, that it'll be Goldwater all over again, and maybe this time they'll get the point.
Right.
All of these Republicans in the base who believe that Mitt Romney lost because he was a squish, John McCain lost because he wasn't conservative enough. And so, but this Republican faction I'm talking about doesn't see anything constructive coming from a Trump nomination, because he is such an aberration. As Peggy was saying, he doesn't represent a strain of Republican thought. He's sort of an insurgent in the Republican Civil War that was already going on, that Lindsey Graham was talking about. That was a civil war between, the John Boehner faction and the Ted Cruz faction. And there's this whole other faction that's totally remade the race. And I think Peggy's right. It's the first time we've seen a wind at Trump's back, the first time we've seen him actually gather some momentum, because previously he would win and he wouldn't move the needle. Then there'd be a setback.
Jeffrey, Donald Trump also looked a little bit more like a traditional candidate this week, giving a foreign policy speech with the teleprompters. Mm-hmm. What did you make of that speech, both in substance, but also just the fact that he was giving one?
One of the most notable aspects of that speech is that Bob Corker came out, Senator Corker, member of the foreign policy establishment, and
chairman of the Foreign
Relations, and sort of praised it and praised his criticism, Trump's criticism of the foreign policy establishment. Of course, Bob Corker is the foreign policy establishment. That was interesting. The speech was fascinating, and it's a fascinating window into what's going to happen over the next 6 months, which is that he attacked Obama from the right, but attacked Hillary from the left. And Hillary has been planning all along to deal with a Rubio-style candidate. And now all of a sudden you have Donald Trump accusing her of being a warmonger for her vote on Iraq and Libya, of course, which is going to be a major subject. And so we're in an this is a completely unique circumstance in which the Republican will be attacking the Democrat from the left on foreign policy and national security.
Really unusual.
And maybe more than foreign policy. I mean, I think he could get to her left on entitlement thinking and stuff like that. So this is a jumble. This is a categorical jumble that he is creating. I also think we always think when we say grassroots Republican, we're kind of thinking of Ted Cruz conservatives, as somebody has noted. This year, we're talking grassroots Republicans. We're kind of talking Trump voters. They're kind of not going for Ted Cruz. That's a whole surprising thing. It's almost as if it's not the base versus the establishment, which I think you've noted, which is what we're used to, but the base surprising the establishment and changing part of its nature, I think.
Certainly.
I was just going to say real quickly, for as much as Trump may scramble categories in the fall, I tend to think that we're not even going to be able to get to that point conversation-wise if Trump is continuously going after Hillary Clinton for being a woman and going after various demographic groups. I mean, this is the thing that constantly strikes me about the Trump campaign. 55% of American voters are women, right? So, even if most of those are not going to just pull a lever for Hillary Clinton, if you are attacking a candidate on the basis of her gender, I think you just risk losing outright. And so I think what's funny about this election, and will be in the fall if Trump is the nominee, is that there are all these ways in which he could scramble categories. But the underwriting reality of it all is he's really unpopular. And I think that's going to be the thing that dominates conversation.
Yeah, Molly, what did you make of Hillary Clinton's response to the attack? I mean, she was happy to turn this into a general election fight, right? They issued the card when he was accusing her of playing the women card. They used this little gimmick. So this seems like a fight she's very happy to have.
Absolutely. I mean, the Clinton campaign, like Jamel was saying, really believes that this is a winner for them. Identity politics in general, whether it's women who feel that Trump has insulted them, minorities feel that Trump has insulted them, Hispanics certainly, and we saw that with the protests at the Trump events in California. That there is a very large faction of people in this country that he has not had to speak to in the course of a Republican primary campaign, and those people all get to vote in November. For Hillary, who has really had trouble ginning up enthusiasm for her historic candidacy as the potential first woman president, that has not gotten her really anywhere in the Democratic primary, particularly with young women. In the general election, she is betting that Trump will mobilize all those people.
And Jeffrey, Senator Lindsey Graham tried to make that general election warning.
Yeah.
The Stop Trump movement is kind of dribbling out onto the ground. There's not much to it.
There is not much. There's a kind of fatalism now, I think, to the fact that this is the nominee, and people are pivoting to that. I would just add one thing to what Molly was saying. I think Hillary will be lucky if Trump keeps, and to Jamel's point, that Trump keeps making this about women. Hillary will have a harder time if Trump actually disciplines himself and talks about Libya and Iraq and the State Department and all of these issues where he can actually gain some traction, at least with an anti-Hillary Clinton sentiment and part of that Republican base. But I don't know if he has the discipline to stay on that message and avoid these kind of hot button issues with 55% of the voting public.
The question is whether the misogyny is frosting for cake or whether it's sort of the actual structure.
Libya is the frosting and misogyny is the cake.
Right.
Is that 100%?
Well, and it was interesting when Paul Manafort was on and you brought up the woman thing, and he immediately diverted, right? He immediately went to, the establishment. So he knows better than to play with that fire. But the question is, as you're saying, can Trump be diversionary in that way?
It's a mistake for the Trump forces to underestimate the still powerful, still there, even if it's a cliche, draw that many women will feel towards seeing a woman candidate they can be supportive of. Don't forget that. Do you know there are a lot of women who'll think this really is a breakthrough and I want to be part of it. I don't think that should be denigrated.
But you think 25-year-old women will still, they haven't been excited about her so far. You think once Bernie Sanders leaves the scene, they're going to become more excited?
I always gather they're kind of punishing her because she's not quite been good enough, and Bernie is a better candidate. They like him better, but their experiences, their senses, they're kind of punishing her. playing around with Bernie, but they'll be back to Hillary in the general. That is, I actually was told that once by a young woman who's a supporter. He's, we're getting her in line.
Before we switch over to the Democratic race, Jamal, I want to get your thoughts. Ted Cruz is still fighting hard, trying to do well in Indiana. He named Carly Fiorina. What's your at the end of the week? What do we think about the naming of a vice president before you get the nomination?
I've been really racking my brain about this one because it strikes me as very strange. I don't think it gathers Cruz any particular electoral benefit. It reeks of desperation in a lot of ways. Someone who's clearly losing, and then he does this gamble involving another candidate who didn't catch fire in the first place. Part of me thinks that this might be an attempt by Cruz, looking past Indiana, looking past the primary, but just to position himself in the fall as like the standard bearer of conservatism, not even leave the Republican Party aside, but he is the conservative candidate, and whether he runs a third party race, I don't know, but to kind of in sort of conservative mind say, I was your other choice, I'm the conservative candidate, and we can leave the Republican Party to wither with Trump, but I am still here.
Molly, let's switch now to the Democrats. Bernie Sanders said he's running as hard as he ever has to defeat Hillary Clinton. What's really going on?
He says that he is, so I believe him. But it was a remarkably defiant Bernie Sanders who we just heard, and that surprised me a little bit because this week, after the loss that he suffered, he in those primaries, he issued this statement saying that his primary goal was to get his issues on the agenda at the Democratic Convention, to have as many delegates as possible to influence the platform. And that seemed like an admission of defeat. That seemed like he was saying, I know I can't be the nominee, but I want to affect what our party stands for going forward. That would be a completely reasonable thing for him to want. And a lot of his supporters are realizing that it is almost mathematically impossible for him to get the nomination under the rules that govern the process. So it is interesting to me that now he is continuing to insist that he just needs these superdelegates to switch, another irony for someone who claims to want the process to be more democratic. But so it'll be interesting to see how he proceeds. It'll be interesting to see if he dials down some of the personal attacks that we started to hear between him and Hillary Clinton, because I think that would be another sign of sort of acquiescence.
Jeffrey, Hillary Clinton is pivoting to the general, both responding on the women question with Donald Trump, but also she had this week she talked about the fact he lives in these towers with his name on them. He doesn't come down into the real world. What do you think about that argument and her movement?
And there are other candidates in the race who could make arguments about the real world probably better than Hillary Clinton, but there's something to that. I mean, I think I've been thinking a lot about how much Bernie Sanders will have an influence over the course. I mean, as he talked to you about just a minute ago, the course of the Democratic Party. And yes, there will be a Bernie Sanders night at the Democratic National Convention, obviously. But I'd be surprised if she pivots to the left to the degree that I think some people hope she will. That would be very surprising. I think she's right now focused entirely, and I've talked to people in the campaign this week, focused entirely on developing lines of attack into Trump and using his unpopularity and using that ivory tower kind of approach to start redefining who he is, not man of the people, but man who lives in the tower.
Jamel, 20 seconds left. What, if you were Hillary Clinton trying to figure out what to give Bernie Sanders, what would you give him to help him come in and unify?
I would give him different rules to the Democratic primaries, more open primaries, fewer closed primaries, and kind of make it easier for Sanders-style candidates to do better in the primary process.
All right, excellent, Jamel. Thank you. Peggy, Jeffrey, Molly, thank you all very much. And we'll be right back with more highlights from last night's dinner. Last night marked President Obama's last appearance at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner here in Washington, where politicians and the press put their differences aside. Hollywood celebrities joined to watch the show, and this campaign year, the president had plenty of material to work with.
8 years ago, I said it was time to change the tone of our politics. In hindsight, I clearly should have been more specific. We've got the bright new face of the Democratic Party here tonight, Mr. Bernie Sanders. There he is. Bernie, you look like $1 million. Or to put it in terms you'll understand, you look like 37,000 donations of $27 each. Hillary trying to appeal to young voters is a little bit like your relative who just signed up for Facebook. Yeah. Dear America, did you get my poke? Is it appearing on your wall? I'm not sure I'm using this right. Love, Aunt Hillary. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, things are a little more, how shall we say this? A little more loose. GOP Chairman Reince Priebus is here as well. Congratulations on all your success. The Republican Party, the nomination process, it's all going great. Keep it up. Is this dinner too tacky for the Donald? What could he possibly be doing instead? Is he at home eating a Trump steak? Tweeting out insults to Angela Merkel? What's he doing? And there's one area where Donald's experience could be invaluable, and that's closing Guantanamo, because Trump knows a thing or two about running waterfront properties into the ground. And with that, I just have two more words to say. Obama out.
And we'll be right back. And there's breaking news this morning from the White House that Malia Obama will be attending Harvard University. She will take a year off and begin in the fall of 2017. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.